Okay, and what I want to do in this video is finish up our look at, or our looking at money and wealth. And what I want to do is try to get to a situation where we combine everything in the previous 4 videos to explain the effects of production, prices, factors of production, money supply, and I want to do all of those things and get that into one single equation that we can explain why the general level of prices, the prices of all goods and services produced in general, change when we take into account changes in the money supply and changes in production. So as I said, this is the last video of money and wealth, and it's the 5th video as well. Now, don't worry, your screen's intentionally black. Now, the idea here is that I want to give a quick case study. And the first thing I'm going to do is put up this flag. Now, this here is the flag of Zimbabwe, okay? It's an African nation. And it was ruled by this guy, who's a guy called Robert Mugabe, and he took power and then became a dictator. And it's the 8th of December, or it certainly is not, it's the 8th of September 2019 now when I'm recording this video, and I understand he just died a few days ago. And the reason why I mentioned this guy is because what we're talking about now are the inflation rates in Zimbabwe since independence, okay? So what we've got here is in 1980, the inflation rate in Zimbabwe was 7%. Now, for reasons that I'm not going to go into now, and I suppose I will mention it, I don't entirely agree with the general thinking on this, but what most central banks want is an inflation rate between 0 and 2%. Stable prices that are rising slowly. Now, there are reasons that they give for this. I actually think that, I'm not wholly convinced by all of those reasons, but, we'll go into that at a later stage when we talk about Unit 2, which is macroeconomics. So, understanding that the supposed ideal target inflation rate is 2%. In 1980, we see 7%. And that's, that means that prices of all goods and services in the economy in general are rising by 7%. Now, some could be rising by less, others could be rising by more, others could even be falling. But what we are saying is that overall, when you average out the increases and decreases in all the prices in the economy, the cost of buying things went up by 7%. So the idea there is that if on the 1st of January 1980, a general whatever collection of goods that you would buy cost you 100 Zimbabwe dollars, by the 31st of December 1980, that same exact bundle of goods with no change in quality would cost you 107 Zimbabwe dollars to buy. Okay, so again, we're just saying here that the rate of 7% is above the target rate of 2%. Now, if you look at in 1981, we have 14%, which is again like 7 times higher than what we would have wanted. 15%, 19%. It's getting kind of out of control. In 1984, we had 10%. Now that's still way too high, but it's almost half the previous year's inflation rate. 10% again in 1985, way too high. But again, it looks like they're starting to control it a bit better until we see 1986. And so on. We get these, like got down in 1988 of 8%, still 4 times higher than what we'd really like. But then after that, it just really starts to take off. Now, if you can continue looking on through these, but like 40% in 1992 is absolutely crazy, 48% in 1998. But if we go across 2004, what we're going to see here is 132.75%. Now, that's just madness. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. You can't run an economy with inflation anywhere near that high. But if we go down to something like 2007, we've got 66,212%. I mean, like, that's just out of control. And it gets worse because when you go across to mid-November 2008, I don't know what that number is. Like, that's just insane. That's just crazy. So what basically happened? So the thing is, and I hope we kind of have an inkling into what happened, they printed way too much money. And I won't go into why. I have opinions, and they seem to be largely the mainstream opinions. But the thing is, what you have to ask yourself here: why do they have denominations of currency that are so high, 100 billion Zimbabwe dollars. And the reason that they have these denominations so high is because the currency became so worthless that they had to print the currency in much, much higher denominations. And when you do that and you're continually increasing the money supply, well, then all that's going to happen is the prices are going to continue to rise, and as such, you're going to have to continue to print the currency in even greater denominations. If we look at this kid here, like, he's got stacks of money, absolute stacks of money. If these were even like, you know, €5 notes, he would have huge money and would be able to buy a lot of goods and services. But the problem is they're not. And the problem is that he's not rich because these notes, these denominations, this currency buys very, very little goods and services. The next thing here is we have these guys and they're holding up this starving billionaire poster. And the first question you have to ask is, why are they billionaires? Well, they have billions of Zimbabwe dollars. And the next question you have to ask is, why are they starving? And the reason that they're starving is because these Zimbabwe dollars buy very, very little. Now, forgive me for this, and I did put in a meme, and a meme can be somewhat crass, and that's certainly not my intention. But the reason that I put this in, because I wanted to show the effects of inflation on exchange rates. So there's the joke here, 50 Cent, the rapper, is like, I really like 50 Cent, or as we call him in Zimbabwe, $4 billion. And I was actually just thinking about this. I'm quite sure 50 US cent would be worth way more than $4 billion in Zimbabwe. Way more. But, you know, what happened? And the thing that happened was that they printed so much money that the money buys very little goods and services in Zimbabwe. And if that's true, well, then foreigners, then people that don't use the Zimbabwe dollar, they are going to be less willing to give their currency over if the Zimbabwe to buy Zimbabwe dollars, or exchange them for Zimbabwe dollars, if the Zimbabwe dollars buys less and less and less. So if we look at this here, we've got on the 1st of January 2001, let's just say that's about 90 Zimbabwe dollars, slightly less than 100 per $1 US. Now the thing is that it really is irrelevant where you're starting from. That's the irrelevant part. What the most telling and important part is, what is the rate of change? And I'm going here, and I'm somewhat rounding off, and I'm going to take the UN estimate because it's the most extreme, really. But on the 1st of January 2009, that's 8 years later, we're kind of up at 10 to the power of 30 Zimbabwe dollars per US dollar. Now don't forget, you know, the US was printing money as well at this time. So they were devaluing their currency as well. And yet you had to give over, let's just even say 100. Let's say 100 Zimbabwe dollars. 8 years later, you had to give one with 30 zero after it, Zimbabwe dollars, to get $1 US. So that's the effects of inflation on both prices and currency exchange. Now, printing money almost always has the effect of inflation. And the reason that I say almost is very important. It almost is true, always has the effect of inflation. But without an increase in production, all printing money will do is cause higher prices. Now, this is, pause the video here for a second and take down this equation. This is the equation that's designed to try to bring together everything we've done in the 4 previous videos in this series into one simple, simplistic, I'm not saying simple, but simplistic equation, or just way of thinking about inflation, why prices increase. So what we're going to say, and I'm going to put up this equation, and everybody panics when I put that up. Please don't concern yourself with that yet. The first thing I want to say is inflation. So let's talk about what inflation is. It's a sustained increase in the general level of prices. So if in general prices are going up, if in general you have to hand over more of your currency to get the same basket of goods and services that you were buying, that's inflation. It's a sustained increase in the general level of prices. That's what inflation is. And this is the equation that links everything together. So inflation equals the percentage change in the money supply, but take away the percentage change in production. And that's really important. We know printing more money has the tendency to cause inflation, and we know producing more goods and services has the tendency to cause deflation. But what happens if both things are occurring at the same time? So this is what this equation is designed to tell. So we've got this red box here, and this here is the Greek letter delta, which means change. Okay, so inflation, what is it? It's the percentage change in prices, in the general level of prices, all prices. Okay, so inflation is measured, it depends on the percentage change, the Greek letter delta for change, the percentage change in the money supply. It's just that blue box there. So each of these boxes underneath are designed to represent the boxes above them, which are written in English. And we've got the percentage change in income. So in economics, Y means income, and you're like, hold on a second, that's not what you've written here, it's production. And I say, absolutely, that's a very fair point. But the thing is, in how do you get your income? And you get your income by producing goods and services and selling it on the market. And so right now I'm producing educational goods and services and I'm selling that on the market. So that's how I'm getting my income, is the idea. And we'll also see in Unit 2 macroeconomics that for an economy as a whole, and it's absolutely true, there's no weird kind of mental gymnastics to kind of make this somewhat plausibly true. It's absolutely true. Income is production, and just get that in mind. Production is wealth. Production is wealth. Why? Because we can consume what we produce. So how we're measuring our wealth is by what we can consume, and we can only consume what we produce. And I know that's not 100% true, because you can buy imports and all that, and I hope to bring in all of these caveats, explain them away in later units, particularly for this one here about imports in Unit 3, which is International Economics. Now, we're saying here in this example that the money supply increased by 5% and the production of goods and services increased by 3%. Okay, well, the first thing is, what are we trying to measure? We're trying to measure inflation, which is how much in general prices rose over a year usually. Okay, so what we're saying is the way to do that in the long run, this holds true in the long run, this equation, it's the percentage change in the money supply minus the percentage change in production. Well, what we're saying here is, what's 5 minus 3? And the answer is simply 2. So inflation, which is the percentage change in the general level of prices, is 2%. So if an average basket of goods, an average collection of things that the average person, I mean, is there such a thing as the average person? I don't know. But the average person buys in a year, from the 1st of January of that year, they cost $100 or whatever, but let's say 100. And by the end of that year, 31st of December of that year, we'd expect them to cost 102. Now, it's no crazy, no mad shakes, no crazy increase. And, that's kind of where most central banks want to be at. So, that's not terrible, but it's also not desirable at all. The money supply increased by 7% and the production of goods and services increased by 2%. And what are we trying to find? Well, we're trying to find inflation. That's what that red box here is. So we're saying inflation equals the percentage change in the money supply minus the percentage change in production. And what we have here is that 5%. 7 minus 2 is 5%. So what we're saying inflation would be in this scenario is that on average, prices would rise by 5%. So if something cost you 100 on the 1st of January of that year, by 31st of December, we would expect it on average, now not just something, I shouldn't have said that. If an average basket of goods, a collection of goods, cost you 100 on the 1st of January of that year, we expect them to cost 105 by the 31st of December of that year. On to the next one. The money supply increased by 2%. So what we're expecting, whenever the money supply increases, we're expecting inflation. Okay? However, we know that when production increases, we're expecting deflation. So, but you see, that's too simplistic. So we're saying what unites them all so that we can get an average predictor of what the change in prices will be. And what unites them both is this equation here, essentially, which is the exact same as this one on the top. So what we're actually saying is, what's 2 minus 3? And that's minus 1. So inflation is minus 1. And let's be very clear on that. Inflation is minus 1. Deflation is a sustained decrease in the general level of prices. And we have deflation of 1%. Not minus 1%, deflation of 1%, or inflation of minus 1%. So in this scenario, if an average basket or average collection of goods and services on the 1st of January of that year cost you 100, we'd expect by the 31st of December of that year they cost you 99. Not bad. Not bad at all, okay? Just a few more simple ones, and I'm sure you get it, just forgive me, it's for completeness. If the money supply increased by 6% and the production of goods and services increased by 10%, well, what's going to happen to prices? And what we'd expect was they'd be falling by 4%. So it'd have inflation of -4 or deflation of 4%. Now, I've been saying that this equation here combines everything that we've talked about. Well, where does the change in production come from? The change in the money supply comes from the central bank. I mean, that's no problem, okay? The government just prints more money, okay? That's easy. But where does this change in production come from? And it comes from the factors of production. And that's what we're going to turn our attention to next. But the factors of production are the ones that produce these goods and services. And so we're talking about changes in production. Well, where do they come from? Well, maybe there's been a technological breakthrough. Maybe entrepreneurs have worked out a better way to combine land, labour and capital without any new ones in order to produce goods and services. Maybe there's just more people, higher labour. So, then that leads on to, well, what happens to GDP per capita? Maybe there's just more capital, so there's no change in GDP per capita. Well, there is, but we're richer because we've produced 10% more, and with the same population, that means that 10%, that population can buy 10% more. All right. So all of this, this whole thing here is designed to capture, how do I put it, all the things that we've talked about thus far. And the last one, if the money supply increased by 5%, but the production of goods and services increased by 5%, well, then we'd expect prices not to change and inflation would be zero. Now, this is the thing. Printing money has the tendency to cause inflation. Producing more and more goods and services has the tendency to cause deflation. So what happens when they're both occurring at the same time? Well, this is how we measure the expected change in prices in general of all goods and services when both of these things are occurring at the same time.